then.
No, so it's fine. Okay. There we go. We'll get there. Okay, we're live. Yeah. Okay, welcome everyone to this We Move session. Welcome to those who are here in person and to you folks up on the stream. If you haven't come across We Move before, We Move is a series of seminars that are delivered by music and tech experts who just happen to be women and gender minority. And today we have Lia Mice, who is going to be talking to us about large digital instruments. Yeah. So a little bit about Lia before we get rolling. So Lia is the 2021 Aurum Award winner. Congratulations for that. And you specialise in electronic music production and digital musical instrument design. And you invented the Chaos Bells, which you'll be telling us about in a bit. Okay. But you've taken the Chaos Bells to a lot of interesting places. You've performed in places like the Barbican, the ICA, the V&A Museum, the ARS Electronica Festival?
Ars
Electronica Festival. Okay. The Tate Modern, WOMB in Tokyo, and the Museum of Arts and Design in New York. The Chaos Bells won the highly commended award for the best innovation in a sound tool or technique at the 2021 Sound of the Year Awards. This is all very impressive. And in addition, you have a new album.
Yes.
And it's out.
It is out. It came out last Friday.
All right. You will have to tell us a little bit about that because I will want to know about that as well. So, which is called Sweat Like Caramel?
Yes.
Good. I'm glad I got that right. Okay. In that case, thank you so much. And I shall just hand over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. And thank you so much for the invite. Yeah, I've been to a lot of Music Hackspace events before. And yes, I'm really honoured to be talking here today. So my presentation is about designing large-scale digital musical instruments. That's not all that I do, and as Jenny mentioned, I am an artist. These are the albums I've made, and the latest one is the big one there, Sweat Like Caramel. So I started making solo albums. The first one was released in 2012, and yeah, that kind of was my biggest artistic output for quite a while. And so just to give you a bit of an overview of what my music sounds like that I produce, I also make the music videos, quite a lot of them myself, because my first degree was in filmmaking. So I love that multidisciplinary kind of aspect to being a musician and being a performer. So I'll just play a tiny snippet of my video from the track Sweat Like Caramel, which is off my new album. All right, that's enough of that. And so aside from recording my music, making music videos, I also perform live. And to me, that's a really big aspect of my creative output. So these are some photos from performing live at Islington Assembly Hall in September 2019. So this is kind of a little teaser for what's to come. But yeah, there's a large instrument then that's Prism Bell. It's being performed there by Janina Bear. And so that instrument kind of was my first big instrument that I designed. And also it changes shape every time I perform live with that instrument. So for example, when I played at the ICA, it was all upright, large poles. So I'll just play a little kind of video of playing at the ICA with that instrument, though in a different physical formation, so that you can kind of get an idea of how these instruments work into my live set. Just pausing it here for a second because, yeah, I'm using a sampler. It's called the Octatrack, and so then I can kind of sample and manipulate these instruments as well. Yeah, so I have been performing live with these instruments for a few years. That was a video from early 2020. And through the lockdown, I spent a lot of time creating another instrument called Chaos Bells, and that is a major part of my PhD research, which I will go on to talk about. But just to give you a little teaser about that instrument, I will play a small video of me and the artist Odd Lost doing a duet on it. A lot of these videos are online, so if you want to watch the rest of them, you can track them down. So how did I start making big instruments? Like, why make really big instruments? I guess, being a musician would be the starting point. And so where I started making music was as a very small child. My mum taught me how to play piano, and here she is teaching my sister how to play piano. But I am this little one right here with my arm reaching up to the piano keys. So ever since I was big enough to even reach the keys, I wanted to play music. And also, maybe that was my first very large instrument, because compared to my size at that age, it was incredibly large. And so I always was very musical, very much playing all different instruments, and then as soon as I could go and see bands, I did. So the first band that I saw live was Boredoms, an amazing experimental band, and this is one of the members, I, and behind I is an instrument called the Sevener, which is an instrument made from 7 electric guitar heads. So my mind was very much corrupt by seeing Boredoms at a young age. And I went and saw them play 77 boa drum on the 7th of July 2007, in which there were 77 drummers all in a spiraling circle, and that was in New York, and that definitely blew my mind in terms of a very large-scale musical performance. And then in 2011, I wrote them some fan mail because I heard that they were doing 111 boa drum on the 11th of November 2011. And I said, look, I really want to plan this with you. And I was symbol number 86. I'm just looking for it. Yeah, I was up there. So that was all rings of cymbal performers, and then all of Boredoms were in the center. And here you could see the Sevener was there. I was playing there. So yeah, that was like, these are just kind of formative experiences of kind of being in awe of large-scale instruments and experimental instrument design, and yeah, that was a high point of my life, playing with the Boredoms. Another really inspiring instrument to me is gravity harp, and that was an instrument designed by Björk and Andy Cavatorta, and it was for Björk's Biophilia tour. It's a harp, essentially, that swings and different strings are exposed to a static plectrum as it goes by, different strings are being plucked. And I think it was around 2012, I opened for Daedalus at a show in Canada, and he showed up with this giant light sculpture called Archimedes, which was designed by Emmanuel Biard and David Leonard. And this didn't make sound, but it blew my mind. It was I think they designed it to be much larger than it was at the actual gig, because it wouldn't fit on the stage at that venue. But yeah, it was about 10 or so foot tall with all these robotically controlled mirrors, and they shone light onto the mirrors, which then shone it back onto the audience. And being in the audience of this gig, being blinded by light, was just such a big experience for me. And I remember thinking, I just wish it made sound. It's a really cool light display, and I'm like, I really wanted it to make sound. But yeah, so another instrument that really inspired me was Kathy Hines' Tipping Point. I got to experience this when I moved to London. I got to see it, I think it was 2016. And so this is multiple very large structures which are kind of like test tubes that pass liquid between them and have a hydrophone in it, and it creates a feedback. So each one has a different microtonal feedback tone. And being in a dark room with this tone cloud of microtonal feedback was a transcendental experience, and I just absolutely loved it. And by then, I'm pretty sure my mind was completely onto the idea that I need to build large instruments. And another show that I saw around then was at Cafe Otto, and it was Miriam Blow playing soft revolvers, which are these large spinning tops, and when they spin, a sample plays. So she plays a whole live performance using spinning tops that light up, and if you ever get the chance to see that, it's amazing. I never got to see this one in person, but Robert Ike Aubrey Lowe did a project called Spellcasting, which was a whole miniature house, not miniature, but like, I'm talking like shed size, small house size, a architectural space that was filled with sound instruments. Some of them were instruments, some were bits of metal, and you can look it up online. It's really amazing. Just playing all of these acoustic sounds in the building was really captivating to me, and taking music to the architectural level is kind of something that I knew I needed to do. So what happened was, aside from the fact that I was making albums, I decided I need to figure out how to make these instruments, but I don't know how. So I decided to go to university. And I got accepted into a PhD program at Queen Mary University of London. It's called the Media and Arts Technology PhD. And I don't have a background in coding. I also don't have a background in physical building. I don't have a background in electronic engineering and computer science, although this PhD is in that department. They accepted me because I'm an artist, and because the media and arts technology overarching theme is the technology that artists use. So artists have knowledge, and that's valuable too. So is coding, so is building, so is electronic engineering, but all of this you can fill in the gaps of. And so I joined that program in 2017, and I've been filling in the gaps ever since. It was really hard learning to code. I failed the C++ class the first time I took it, and worked really hard, learned, yes, I'm seeing somebody nodding as well. It's difficult, but it's not impossible, and it's like learning any language. You have to practice, and you'll get there, and you can, you know, you can ask for help, you can iterate, and so I'm still getting there, but I'm really glad to be sharing some of my work while I'm still getting there. You just learn by doing, right? And that's what I've learned. So while at Queen Mary, my supervisor is Andrew McPherson. So the research that I'm presenting today, we did together. He supervised it and also is my co-author. So when I say we, maybe I'll be later saying something like we did this. That's the we in that is Andrew McPherson. So Andrew designed an instrument called the magnetic resonator piano, and what it essentially is there are magnets attached to every string of the piano, so you can just play the piano keys and have the magnets resonate the strings, which means they can infinitely sustain as long as you can hold your fingers down. And then, so the sound you're hearing is actually the acoustic sound of the piano strings. It's kind of like if anyone's used an EBow on a guitar, so it's imagine an EBow on every single string, but custom made. It's a really cool instrument. So it's been really fantastic to have Andrew as a mentor while I'm figuring out how I'm going to build these big instruments. And so because this is the topic of my research, my PhD research, it's interesting to say, okay, I'm interested in large instruments, but another angle is why is music instrument design obsessed with small instruments? The whole industry is shrinking instruments. So like synths are getting smaller and smaller. They're fitting in the palm of our hands. They're fitting on our wrists. They're fitting on our fingers as rings. And all of these commercial instrument design companies, year after year, are putting out smaller and smaller synths. And of course, this is to cater to the bedroom music producer with limited space, the performer who wants to bring instruments out to play live. You know, it makes sense. And also, they're manufacturing these. Of course, they want to use less materials. But the fact that this is the only size, not rings is a silly size, but like the fact that smaller instruments is the only size that we can get means that we're missing out on potentially a type of music that could be made with large instruments. But is that the case? Like, is there different music that's made on large instruments or small instruments? So that's the question of my PhD. So what does the size of an instrument bring to the act of making music? So to explore that, I talked to performers of large acoustic instruments, because performers of large acoustic instruments know that large acoustic instruments are not small instruments just scaled up. They actually have their own qualities, and there's something that they like about them. Otherwise, why would they be lugging around a contrabass flute when they could be bringing a piccolo flute in their pocket? So what I did is I ran a study to find out what it is about large acoustic instruments that means that some people dedicate their whole careers to these extremely large instruments. So for this study, I interviewed 7 people. Each of them was trained on a physically large traditional instrument. And so for an hour we talked, they answered some questions about what it's like to play that instrument, and we videoed that, and all of the instruments were designed to reveal how the performers respond to the effects introduced by the large scale of the instruments. So the instruments that were performed by the people in the study are contrabassoon, contrabass clarinet, organ, contrabass flute, jill, tuba, and baritone saxophone. And the people who played these instruments also played other instruments. Quite often it was the smaller version of those instruments, though not necessarily. And they all had a different, they were from a mix of different musical backgrounds. And so when we analysed the interviews, a lot of things kept coming up obviously size, idiomatic techniques, performance fatigue, repertoire, weight, breath. So yeah, we did some thematic analysis on the interview data, and we came up with some findings from this discussion. So the first was that there is an impact of size, weight, and fatigue on the performers. The cause of performance fatigue is directly related to the size of the instrument. Some performers choose not to perform the instrument live because of the fatigue or the environmental impact of traveling with the instrument. And so, yeah, really the size influenced whether they were even going to play it at a concert. There was also, this was an interesting finding that I didn't actually know about. So there's an influence of why they actually like the instrument based on the timbre that you can make with it, compared to the timbre of tones you can make with the smaller version. So large woodwind instruments are designed with a rich tone in the lower register and an airy tone in the upper register, because that's the whole reason that they exist. They're holding down the bass tones. But the performers who like to improvise with these instruments, they love performing in the upper registers where the sound, you can break the sound and you can play around with how it sounds really fragile. So that was something that really drew performers to these instruments. And one of the participants said, the character between the octaves changes quite dramatically. They each have a very different tone color. I think if you put it in a different octave, it would definitely change the character of the music. So yeah, they really chose specific registers of these instruments to create repertoire with a certain character. And there was one more finding that was interesting. It was that there is a microscale within the macroscale. Microscopic changes in the embouchure and air pressure can result in huge changes in the sound and tone quality. A millimeter change in angle of airstream has large effects on the tone, even stopping the tone altogether. So even though these are really large instruments, they're not small instruments scaled up, because there's such small changes you can make to the way you play these large instruments that changes the overall sound. And that just doesn't exist in the smaller instruments, or it exists in a completely different way. So adding these findings together, I used them to think about what would be an interesting way to design a digital musical instrument, considering what it is that performers of large acoustic instruments really love about their instruments. So I came up with some guidelines at that point about designing large digital instruments. So addressing the size and the weight and the performance fatigue, I said, consider how design can decouple size from weight. Consider impact that the strength and size has on the material epistemological scripts. And so with the timbral variation across registers, I thought you could consider putting in Easter egg tones that are difficult to perform, that you might discover if you're doing a difficult technique. Or think about putting, like, one register has weaker tones and another has like really strong tones. And offer performing many registers at once, and considering ways that implementing sound design varies across registers. And then, influenced by this discovery about the microscale within the macroscale, a design consideration could be to consider designs that allow for microscopic gestures to result in large sonic effects of the overall tone or performance. So with that study over, I got invited to play a pretty exciting gig to open up for Object. And I said, yeah, I'd like to play, but I'm going to bring my large instrument. Well, my large instrument didn't exist yet, but I sent this sketch of what I was asking for. I said, yeah, I'll see you there. I'm going to bring this stuff. And I just kind of made it up. I said, this is my large instrument. I need a projection screen. I'm going to bring a custom light box. I'll be here with my sampler and I'll have a dancer over here playing that instrument. So it gave me a bit of a deadline to actually make a large instrument. Even though I knew that was the next step for my research, I wanted to start really playing with the form and the structure of a large instrument. But starting out with just this sketch, which kind of doesn't mean much at all, was like, where do I go to build this instrument? And so I started making a few different sketches, but my mind doesn't really work that way because I'm not a great drawer. So I got some straws and started building very small models. So some of these models, I just was exploring like form. I knew that I wanted to work with these pipes because I had access to them, and I just thought that they would make a good design choice in terms of aspects that I was already thinking about in terms of, for example, the weight of a large instrument. So I had access to some plastic PVC pipes that were recycled from an art exhibition. So I thought if I could build an instrument out of that, it's lightweight. That kind of counteracts some of the things that I'd heard in the study about musicians considering not bringing their instrument to gigs because it's too heavy. So I just made some very small models to explore what shape this new instrument would be. And I tried out all different things, and I took photos of it at all different angles. And I like the idea that if you were looking at it from different parts of the stage, it might look a little bit different. So this shape I started to like was these pipes jutting out in different angles in a horizontal way. So I started exploring that. And then I had a show at Supernormal Festival. So that was the first time that I endeavored to create Prism Bell to bring that on stage. So that is this version of the Prism Bell instrument. But as I mentioned earlier, it changes shape all the time. So if you would like to see a very short snippet of the very first Prism Bell performance, this here is Janine Hebert, who is a London-based electronic music performer and also a trained gong artist. So she's a fantastic person to work with when you're building crazy instruments. And so this is us performing at Supernormal. So I liked it, but it was a bit wobbly. And originally when I had created those draft versions with the models, I only put the frame in to keep the small model up, and then I realized, oh right, the frame is actually keeping it steady. So I added the frame back in. So back to what we were actually preparing for, which was to open for object at Islington Assembly Hall, I started to build large-scale models of the instrument, like prototypes, while we rehearsed in a studio. So this is one of the early prototypes. I didn't have the sensors or anything hooked up because I was still just working with the shape of the instrument. And so this here is Vasiliki Papostolo. She dances in some of my videos, and she danced on stage at this gig. And that's Janine Bear in one of the kind of prototype versions of the Prism Bell for that particular gig that we were working on. And then eventually I came up with this style, and that really became the version that was at the gig. And then I updated the rider that I sent to them to make it actually look like the real instrument. And it's not too different from the original one, but it just, you know, I just think that you can allow yourself a little bit of leeway sometimes when you accept something and you have a vision and then it changes. You can always just send another rider. Do you know what I mean? So I also don't know how people draw their riders, but that's how I do it. The gig itself, we had so much fun. Nat Sharp did the costumes, and Daisy Dickinson did the video. And if you want, I can do a very short video of this instrument and how it was at that show. Okay, so that's Prism Bell. It fulfilled some of the guidelines. It was lightweight, it was large, but it didn't have the variation across registers of the timbral quality. And it didn't have, well, you could hit it in smaller ways and larger ways and then the sound would change, but I thought there was a bit more movement to be addressing that idea of the micro scale in the macro scale. So the next instrument taking on board these design guidelines was Chaos Bells. So with Chaos Bells, the bottom register is all very clear tones, and the upper register has a lot of harmonics, which makes it more bell-like. So that addresses the idea of there being a clear lower register and a more fragile upper register. There's also a way to change the timbre of the tones when the pendulums are being tilted, which is what Odd Lust is doing in this image. If you strike the instrument, it sounds one way, but when you tilt it, that tone becomes more and more broken apart until it becomes total white noise. which is why it's called Chaos Bells. So to create this, I've thrown this slide in for the students of the Creative Computing Institute because I was talking to some members of staff before I came here, and they said, oh, they'd like to know a bit about how it's made. So I threw this one in here. How is it done? This is an analog accelerometer. It's connected to a Bella Mini microcomputer. So you can think of that as if you've used Arduino or something like that. Bella is designed specifically for audio so that there's minimal latency. There isn't perceivable latency in the code the way it's running because it happens all under 10 milliseconds, all of the code crunching and then the sound coming out the other end. So people can't perceive that. So actually, when people play Chaos Bells, they get a little bit tricked into thinking it's an acoustic instrument when it's really not. It's a bunch of plastic pipes. It doesn't have a resonant sound. It sounds like tapping something, but the actual sound is coming from the Karplus strong algorithm, which is running in pure data and all wrapped up in C++ to be read by the Bella. So if anyone has any questions about that, you can ask me later. So with Chaos Bells created in this way, we ran a study to find out what will people do when they play a large digital instrument. Going back to the original idea of the PhD being like, how does size influence music performance? So to compare how people do it, we invited 10 musicians who are all London-based electronic musicians. They play a range of instruments. And we invited them to do 4 one-hour sessions with the instrument, with the goal at the end to have created a 3-minute performance that would be live streamed on a concert. For half of the participants, we gave them one layout of the instrument in which the lower register tones are all across the bottom and the higher register tones are all across the top. And for the other half, we gave a different layout in which all the lower register tones are on the left and all the upper register tones on the right. And that way we could compare what they were doing with the instrument, because what they're playing, if they're playing version A or version B, would actually result in different tones. So they did all 4 sessions and they all created a concert performance. So I'm going to play a very short video that will just show a couple of these performances that were part of the concert. So we looked at all of the performances they did. They had some other musical tasks to do in the earlier sessions as they learned how to use the instrument, and so we asked them to create different compositions all the way through. So we analysed what tones they played, the physical gestures that they did for playing these tones, and we also interviewed them at the end of each session, so we did another thematic analysis on the interviews. And we found some pretty interesting takeaways. So the first was the musicians scoped their compositions around what's convenient to be performed. So they largely played in the pendulums that are within 1 meter width, that fit within the size of their bodies. So what is comfortable to be performed in front of them. And then they would create these musical pauses to access other tones. 73% of all compositions created during the study featured only tones within the width of 5 pendulums. 88% of all compositions in the study featured tones located both on the upper and lower tiers, but only 27% of tones in the composition were located on the upper tier. So what that means is that if they were only playing mostly on the lower tier, they're going to get different tones, whether they're playing layout A or layout B. So that means that the effort of holding their arms up to play the higher tones deterred them from playing the ones physically located on the upper tier. And so, speaking again, this is an example of the musical pause. So we found that because they were playing what was conveniently located in front of their bodies, these performances included a pause while they access different areas. That was a common feature of the motivic analysis. Another takeaway was that nobody is a blank slate. So we found that the performances and the ways that the performers were playing the instrument were influenced by the musical instruments that they have previously performed. So the cello player played the instrument and said himself he played the instrument in the way that he would play the cello. And a synth player said that the compositions she made were similar to synthscapes that she has made. We also asked them, how would you improve this instrument? And their suggestions were really influenced by their musical histories as well. Like a bass player said, oh, you could add pedals to play more bass. And a violin player said, well, you could make it bowable. So this really speaks to the idea that when a musician is playing an instrument, it's not just themselves and the instrument creating the music. There's more at play in the musical entanglement, and that includes their own histories, the kind of sociocultural environment, and it's something to take into mind when you're building instruments and designing instruments and understanding music performance. And the third takeaway is that when musicians are confronted with a mismatch between interface size and body, they talk about changing their body rather than the instrument. So there was one performer who said, hey, why don't you lower the top tier to be easier to access? But there were 3 performers who said, oh, I feel like I need more arms, or I need longer arms. So they were making comments about wanting to change their bodies. So it's quite interesting to understand that musicians, when confronted with an instrument, they may actually consider their own identity in relation to this instrument, things that they want to change, and that's a responsibility of an instrument designer to take on board. It also speaks to the ways that we need to consider these musical entanglements between the performer and the instrument. So I have a few favorite quotes about that. One is, the extent to which digital technology shapes who we are means that whoever shapes technology puts the chisel on humanity. That's from Christopher Frauenberger. And when we design for or with bodies, we actually design bodies themselves. That's from Homewood et al. So these were the findings of the research conducted with Chaos Bells. After this study, I decided to take Chaos Bells on tour, so take it out of the lab and see what it was like performing it myself, because I am really interested in this idea of why there aren't more large instruments. And I had performed Prison Bell at a few different festivals and shows, but I had the opportunity to go to various places like Birmingham, where I played a kids gig, and Coventry. No, this was in Coventry. I took it to New Orleans, and I took it to Belfast. So I learned a few more things about building instruments through the process of actually performing with the large instrument outside of the lab. And I'll just play a very short example of how Chaos Bells was implemented into my live set. And this is from a show in Birmingham in April. So I do have to say touring with a large instrument is a drag. I have got some updated design guidelines having had this experience of touring with it. So, for example, how will you install it? How long do you need to ask for the installation? This might be something that I might consider in the future of designing an instrument, because if it takes a really long time to install it, you need to ask the venue, like, can I show up that early? Is there staff for me? It's really, in reality, it's very difficult to do to get people to show up earlier to a venue and say, you know, they might, when they want to book you, say, yeah, you can have 3 hours. And then they might call you up on the week of the show and say, oh, actually, like, can we just make that 1.5 hours? So it's really something to consider. How are you going to pack it down after the show? Because perhaps you want to leave it on stage while everyone else is performing. So then you need to stay later to pack it down. So these are some new ideas I'm putting into my new guidelines of designing large instruments. Another issue is storage. Where do you store it when you're not playing it? Right now, the instrument is in these 2 boxes, which are 1 meter long, and this one is 50 centimeters wide, and that one probably about 27 centimeters wide. So they're like these sizable boxes that are currently in my hallway. I would like to set up the instrument in the place where I've been able to set up before, but that's not my space. So I would definitely recommend to people, think about where you're going to install it, where you're going to store it, where you're going to work on it when you're building a large instrument, because it does become something that you're troubleshooting on the fly, and it's really good to kind of know these in advance. And another that I would say, having physically toured with this instrument, I probably didn't think enough about before building it, was the transportation aspect of it. So it's in these boxes because I shipped it to New Orleans because I was showing it there, and then I had to ship it back. I don't, like, there are kind of good aspects to shipping it rather than bringing it on and playing with you if you made it small enough to put in a suitcase to take with you. The good thing is you don't have to go to the airport with a taxi, but the bad thing is you're just handing it to a stranger to hope it shows up at the other end and doesn't incur customs charges. And also even the box that it's shipped in is included in its customs value. So I have better boxes than those, but those boxes themselves could have been seen as me importing and exporting nice boxes. So my kind of concept of shipping things around through customs, which I already own and I'm bringing back into the country, is just to say, look, it's not worth anything. It's an art installation, and just cross your fingers that it comes back. But that might not be for you. You might prefer to have it with you, even carry it on so that the electronics don't break or something like that. Well, you're going to have to consider, how am I going to make it smaller? Am I going to make it nesting? Am I going to make it telescoping? These are ideas that would be really useful when thinking about how to transport it. The other thing is, being a live performer, I'm used to being able to get on a train and play a show. I could walk to a show, have my things in my bag. Building large instruments, I now need a mode of transport. I toured to Belfast driving, and I didn't really like doing that because of using fuel, and so it is a consideration. How can we build these large instruments to have less environmental impact? And that's something that I'm working on in the future. And yeah, I'm going to keep on doing it. So thanks so much for listening to my talk, and I really hope there are some questions.
Right, so this might look strange to everybody here, but the reason we're going to do it with this is so that people on the stream can hear the questions. So we're going to start with questions from the room, and those of you on the stream who are listening, if you have questions, drop them in the chat and I'll scoop them up. So does anyone want to be the brave person who starts with their question? Ooh, yep, okay, we'll go this way first.
So playing this instrument is kind of a performance in its own. So is that something you looked at it when you were doing your study as to the performance aspect of things? I know you said musicians play in a smaller place, but maybe I guess you haven't, but you could maybe look at it, or have you thought about looking at it with people who use their bodies to play things? Because I feel like it would. That's a fun thing that watching someone play this instrument would be the body use as well.
Yes. So one of the aspects of the analysis was to look at what gestures they were performing that make sound and what gestures they perform that don't make sound. And we found, while also talking to the participants, that there were some gestures that they did. They're called ancillary gestures because they're not related to the sound that they're making, but they're performative gestures. So the performers would do things like lift up one pendulum back towards themselves and push the other, even though it would sound exactly the same to pull them both together. They would do that, and they said, because it's just more performative, you can play with the visual aspect of performing this instrument. And another performer made up a performative gesture that they called the gym equipment move. So in that case, they were alternating, performing the upper register tones, and they actually said if the instrument was smaller, it wouldn't be as fun to play that move. And they even said, why don't you make this instrument heavier, because I think it would be really fun to use these even more performative moves and really play into the weight. And then there were performers who took large steps and skipped in between and did things like that when they hit it, rather than you could just hit it like that, but did a really big or they would if you get it into the chaos mode where it's droning out the white noise, if you then let go, it takes a while for that sustain to stop. So several of the performers would conduct that drone and hold out a pose or do something, and then once the drone ended, kind of act as though they were controlling the drone with their hands, or that was a part of the performance of the instrument. So there is something about the large scale of the instrument that had people performing in these large gestural manners, and they said it was fun. So yeah, we did look at that.
Awesome. Over here.
Yeah, you kind of answered my question a bit just
Okay.
now. What are like you talked about Easter eggs and stuff. What are some Easter eggs that came out of this, or like some unexpected sounds that you weren't expecting before you made it that kind of came about once people started really touching it?
Yeah, so something that's really fun about making instruments is you don't know what people will do when it's in their hands. You can design an instrument, but they might not even want to play it, or they may not want to play certain aspects of it. So there were these ridges that are built into each pendulum, and they're inspired by the güero. So if you rub a drumstick over it, it would have a repeated tone. So some performers did that. Some made up kind of methods of sticking the drumstick inside of the tubes and rattling them like a bell. And then one or two even did that at the same time as raising the tube so that then it would drone as well as rattle like a bell. But there were, I suppose, yeah, everybody was just exploring what the instrument would do. But I would say the more Easter egg type sound is the fact that as it gets higher and higher in the upper register, it gets more and more harmonics. So it sounds more and more bell-like. And that would be more because that would be, I guess, more one of those tone things where it's an interesting tone. Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh, yeah.
So you said that there were like accelerometers inside,
Yeah.
so that would like determine the sound that created
Yeah.
from that movement. But what about, is there anything for vibration? So like how would it register, like the little bumps on the side? Or
Yeah.
anything?
So there's only one sensor in each pendulum, and it is this accelerometer. So what that is, it does recognize the vibration, because if you think about it, when it tilts, if it's vibrating, it will tilt because it's from something that's hanging. So that will then make the code go up and down and up and down and up and down. And so that does get the vibration. And that also means that that same sensor will recognize when it's tilted. So if you hit it with a mallet, it has a short staccato sound. That's from it vibrating very quickly and then stopping. But if you hold the pendulum up at an angle, it drones, and it's all the same code that does that.
I have a question. So do you have any performances, actually I should go on my marker. Sorry, stream. Do you have any Chaos Bell performances coming up?
Yes. It will be at Eclectic on Saturday, the 23rd of July, which is my album launch party. It hasn't been announced yet, so look out online for tickets and things. But
I think you just announced it. I hate to break it to you.
It's announced.
It's announced.
But the tickets aren't on sale yet, but will be hopefully later this week or next week. So see you all on the 23rd of July at Eclectic. It's a Saturday.
Awesome. Second question. You kind of touched on this already a little bit, but what do you feel like you've learned from the Chaos Bells project that you might take into the next large-scale instrument design, assuming that you are making one or planning one?
Yeah, I'm not done with large instruments yet. I'm
Yeah.
definitely excited to build more. What have I learned? I definitely want to think more about packing it down smaller and then making it larger. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if it could just be like a pop-up tent? I just love that because it's just so much work building it all the time, every time I want to play it live. So then the other aspect is I'd like to think more about different materiality. There was a reason that this instrument was built from plastic, and that is because we could run that study where we jumbled up the location of the pitches, because the plastic, when you touch it, doesn't make a sound. That's the great thing about digital instruments. You can decouple the size from the sound, because with acoustic instruments, if it's big, it's deep, because that's what it's made for. Like a long string is lower than a short string, right? So it's coupled to the physicality. The sound is coupled to the physicality. But with a digital instrument, it's not. So that was great because we could shuffle it around, but I don't necessarily want to work with plastic again in the future. I would like to explore more biodegradable, environmentally friendly materials. And I don't necessarily need to work in digital instrument design as well in the future. I could work with acoustic large instruments as well. So there's a lot to take from this research, but I think for me the biggest thing is that there's something there about large instruments. It's not being offered to us. I like them. The people who played them in the studies liked them. So I'm going to keep having a look at that and thinking about all the different ways that they could be built. And yeah, I'll just keep exploring.
Cool. Yeah, there's a spectacle to them as well, isn't there, for people who are enjoying the performance of them because of the physicality of them being on stage. That adds a whole nother dimension to it.
Yeah. I do think so. When I play live without them, I do have the habit of just having my sampler and being stuck into that. And it's really fun
Like
to have
this.
something big to use my body to play. And
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Yes.
I just thought it was really interesting when you were talking about how, I don't know if this is related to technology as such, but how in the study you found people thought they needed to extend the body rather than change the size of the instrument. And I just thought it was interesting in terms of if you, historically the musical performers and also thinking of conductors, is interesting how, to me, that's really, like, musicians have to really kind of perform with their bodies. So I just thought, I don't know if you felt there was any relationship between the types of instruments that people played and who, and possibly why people think of size in that way as musicians.
yeah, I'm not really sure, but I know as a musician myself, I used to think of instruments as being just how they are. I wouldn't think, oh, I'd change the design of a violin or I'd change the design of a drum set. But somebody has designed these instruments, and the violin, it's not very good for the body to play. Performers get injuries from playing, and there's many instruments like that. So I do think considering performers' bodies first as part of the instrument design process is a way forward. So yeah, I'm not sure what else to say to answer that.
I think as musicians we have that kind of like respect towards instruments where we kind of just want to respect how they are and just play them the best we can. So I think it's really interesting to design really big ones and see how humans adapt to them.
Yeah, I mean, the thing of instruments being adapted for the way that human beings use them and play them is something that doesn't get talked about a ton, but is actually really fascinating, and it does happen. Like a really easy recent example, sadly not a large-scale instrument, but still an example, is St. Vincent designing a guitar with Ernie Ball, an electric guitar, which she designed because basically the taxing effect of playing electric guitars and carrying them, and because all the stress, basically the stress upon the trapezius, I think it's called, is the sheet of metal that connects your two shoulder blades, is enormous. And she ended up having to take a chiropractor on tour with her because she's not a big person; she's quite small. And so what she did was she sat down with Ernie Ball, who are a prolific guitar designing company, and they designed a guitar to suit her body, so that it wasn't as heavy to be able to take on tour with her, so she wouldn't have to pay for a chiropractor to go everywhere with her. And they became wildly popular. I can't remember what they're called as well, which is really annoying. But they're also lovely instruments to play. But they have helped a lot of musicians, particularly musicians of a smaller frame, so those who are gender minority or women who are physically built smaller, to not run into so many back and health complications as a result of kind of prolific touring, particularly. So it's sort of it's like a 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, because your point's really interesting about the fact that people do want to respect the instrument, hence all the comments about I wish I had longer arms. But equally, you know, it's if we're making instruments, we probably should be looking at how we're making them.
Yeah, I feel the same way about St. Vincent. I played guitar for years, and I would play it actually for the first few years of performing my solo project. I would play guitar and loop it and sing and have samplers and things, but I stopped taking the guitar out. But I was terrible at it, and then I got a Steinberger guitar, which is basically just the neck of the guitar with just a little tiny body, and I suddenly loved the guitar. It fit properly around my body when I would play it. I'd pull it out and sit it on my knee when I would be at home and play it. I just played it so much more, and I was like, oh, I should have gotten a tiny guitar. You know, the neck wasn't any shorter. It was just the way the body of the guitar fit with me that works much better. And you know what? That part doesn't make any sound. It doesn't change the way the instrument sounds. It's the strings and the pickup. That's an electric guitar. And you can do that with just essentially the neck of the guitar and a pickup. So all of the heavy wood and everything, that's really unnecessary.
Yeah, I think with digital and electric instruments, there's a lot more flexibility in that direction as well, which you talked about earlier in terms of acoustic and size being tied to one another. Question from the stream. Sean has asked, would/could there be, I say it, I think it means the instrument, could it be affected by acoustic feedback, e.g. if the monitors are too close to the instrument? Is that a thing?
The sensor is reacting to vibration or angle, so it doesn't feedback like that.
So that's a no.
No, you'd have to put a mic into it to give it a feedback. It creates its own feedback through the actual synth engine. That's a feedback in itself, but no, to create the feedback of, for example, a mic and a speaker, it doesn't work that way.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, so I like the fact that you collaborate with dancers, and when you build the instrument, did you think of ways for them to express more, and which kind of feedback did you have from the dancers, like if they want to make them see a new perspective of music and the movements as well? I found this really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So back. What I was showing, I guess, when we were workshopping the instrument design, these ones, so this version, it wasn't even plugged in, and I was just seeing what she sort of was doing with this instrument and what felt good. And I did take into consideration her feedback about it, and it isn't something I necessarily aimed for massively, but it is something that I would consider in the future. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any last questions? Okay, cool. All right. So before we go, can you tell us a bit more about your new record?
Okay. It's called Sweat Like Caramel. It's out on Objects Limited. You can find it online. It has 8 tracks. I made it using a 4-track tape machine, which I would cut up the tape. I'd play into it, record the tape, cut it up, and kind of mix up the tape and then put it back together. And all of this was an elaborate way for me to kind of get out of muscle memory of playing the same melodies all the time and I think, yeah, I'm really into processes that kind of get you out of that kind of your tried and tested ways of making music. And maybe that's what my instrument design's about as well. But yeah, so I just really had a lot of fun experimenting with the tape machine, but then also not being a purist about it and also throwing like synths in there and drum machines and my voice. And that's my new album. It just came out last Friday.
Cool, amazing. So we can find it on the streaming platforms everywhere. Yeah, all the old familiar places. Okay, great. Okay, cool. So thank you so much, Lia Mice.
Thanks.
Yes. Right, so we really hope you enjoyed this. We are running 25 of these seminars altogether. This, I think, was number 12. I think it's number 12. Our next one will be coming up soon. Our next one at UAL will be about machine learning and composition. So do keep an eye and an ear if you are a UAL student or staff. And you are about, I will get the staff at CCI to start talking and telling you about that soon. And in the meantime, we have sessions coming up with Chagall of the Mimu company, who is a Mimu specialist and creates music using the Mimu gloves through gesture recording. And she's up in the Netherlands, but she's coming to see us first ahead of her tour, which is called Unlocked, where she will be bringing another large-scale installation, which she will be controlling with her hand gestures with the gloves. So she won't just be controlling sound, she'll also be controlling a huge visual display called BABY. So she will be coming to talk about basically give us a behind-the-scenes look at how she put that show together. That will be at Talyard. We've also got some phenomenal people like Eve Horn and Anna Disclaim and some that I haven't announced yet, but I think I just did. Oh, look, it's catching. And we also have Leslie Gaston, who's an incredible audio engineer who's going to be doing a session with us at L Acoustics in their 360-degree surround sound room. All of these sessions are free. You just need to book your spot if you want to join us IRL through musichackspace.org. And yeah, you can literally just secure your place and then show up, or you can join us on the live stream. It's totally up to you, but we really like to see your faces. So yeah, go and check it out at musichackspace.org and reserve your free spots for the We Move sessions that come up. Also, feel free to explore our other courses, because we do have other courses as well. But yeah, that's it for now from us. And thank you so much for joining us. So we will see you at the next We Move session.